Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very, very much for turning up for this very, very important event. It's very, very exciting to get some results based on evidence, based on research on our East African environment on the ccTLD's. I'm also very excited by those who have turned up because when I look at the faces of those present, it's a wealth of experience from East Africa, from outside East Africa, globally, and we are going to use all this to strengthen, to look at the research we found and to see what else we need to do to make our case for ccTLD's in East Africa. So this session will be very straightforward. We have a document, research carried out last year and a part of this year. We'll get a feel of the findings of that research and then the way forward. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity to interrogate, be it the process, be it the findings, be it the way forward. But that interrogation is two-way. Give some inputs that will make the report even much more polished and help. And whatever you say is a contribution towards making ccTLD's in our region, East Africa, and by extension, the whole of Africa, stronger and position them to be able to serve our African brothers and sisters. So, welcome to the session. Now, to move forward, I'll ask for a quick introduction so that we know each other, because we are not many, but very important people. My name is Muriuki Mureithi. I'm an ICT consultant based in Nairobi, working around the region. Very, very much interested in the evolution of internet, having been involved since we brought internet in this country. The first link, we're talking about that 2 kbps, and we said Kenya is connected. That was 10 years ago. Today, we are very far, but we still have challenges. We want now to make sure we mainstream that internet to be part and parcel of our socio-economic development. And I'm excited to be part of that process. I'm also excited to see some of my friends here. So we'll start from you and ask you a quick introduction.
My name's Keith Davidson from New Zealand. I'm associated with the .NZ ccTLD, have a very active interest in the Pacific Islands ccTLD arena. I'm the chair of APTLD, the Asia Pacific ccTLD organisation, a CCNSO councillor in ICANN, and co-chair of ISOC's Advisory Council.
Thank you very much. That's the sort of excitement we are looking for. Thank you. Next.
My name is Lala Andrea Mampianina. I come from Madagascar, and I am the president of the NICMG, the .mg ccTLD.
Hello, my name is Suleiman Umtanaga from Ivory Coast. I am the general manager of .ci. I am also a member of IFTLD. Thank you.
I'm Dalmas Menya from Kenya. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Telio Systems Limited, Kenya. Thank you.
My name is David Wambua. I'm the CEO, KeNIC, that's Kenya Network Information System, the .k registry for Kenya. Thank you.
Could I ask you to please come here so that you can use the... Let's come and thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Swami Kung, and my colleague here is Chen Ngọc Linh from VNIC, Vietnam Network Information Center, Vietnam.
My name is Andrew Mack. I run a boutique specialty consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. called AM Global, and we work with companies and donor agencies that are interested in doing more work in emerging markets with a special focus on Africa and Latin America. And this is, I think, my 13th time in Kenya. So I'm a veteran of 34 countries on the African continent. So very, very interested in seeing how the progress on the CC world is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last time we were discussing the same topic, you remember? But that was ICANN.
I do, I remember, yeah.
And now I want to tell us whether there's any change since then.
Okay, my name is Abibu Rashidin Taigie. I'm the manager of Tanzania Network Information Center, in brief TISNIC, and I'm also the director of FTLD in the capacity of the treasurer.
Good morning, I'm Vince Cerf. I'm Google's chief internet evangelist and former chairman of ICANN, former president of the Internet Society, and co-inventor of the internet. So I'm very much excited to be here. I'm eager to learn more about the situation in East Africa with regard to ccTLD support, and like many of you, eager to see the internet serve your needs and to grow the GDP in all countries here.
Now, that's why I said I'm very excited to be in this session. You have heard who is here. I don't think he needs an introduction. Just say he's the grandfather of the internet. Thank you. I'm proud to be next to him.
My name is Paul Muse from KeNIC, the Kenya Network Information Center.
Paul, because they are the ones who drove this agenda, of course, with KICTANet.
My name is Alice Munywa, the lead researcher of this study.
Thank you. We're introducing ourselves. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Xie Chun from China, MIT, Ministry of Industry and Information Technology.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Simon and she's Carol. We are going to be the remote participation moderators.
Thank you very much. Now we know each other and we can go straight to business. As I said, this is based on research work carried out. And a document has been prepared, which has been distributed to all of you. So I want to know who is not having a document entitled Strengthening ccTLD's in Africa towards evidence-based best practice from East Africa.
I don't think I have. I have many versions of this one.
Oh, no, that's a long one.
Okay.
Do you have enough?
So if you have an extra, I'll take it.
I can share this one. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have okay. So we have 1 hour and 10 minutes left, and we are going to make use of that time. So the first thing is I'll ask our evangelist of ICT in the region, Aris Munywa. Oh yes, Aris Munywa, who was the inspiration behind this study, to give us the context. Why did she think this was necessary? How was it carried out? And what does she see going forward on such the environment allowed us on ICT, ccTLD's in East Africa? Aris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mureithi, and I'm very pleased to be presenting these research findings. I think we're nearing the end of, and beginning to disseminate the research findings. But a little background to it. Kenya led and convened the first East African IGF in 2008 using a bottom-up multi-stakeholder approach, which involved bringing together multi-stakeholder representatives from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. During the sessions and the discussions and dialogue in 2008, the East African IGF, both at the national level and at the regional level, identified several critical issues, that were very unique to the East African region, and one of them was the acknowledgement or the recognition that the region's ccTLDs were rather weak in terms of competitiveness, management, skills, and capacity. And so we felt that, we've always felt that the multi-stakeholder model is actually, felt the impact of it is actually felt at the local level. And we felt that we needed to have the regional and national IGFs doing something concrete, having a concrete outcome. And so we decided, rather than the usual dialogue, that we take one of the issues every year and take it to not necessarily a conclusive end, but develop a policy advocacy strategy that would deal with one issue. And the one that we picked was under critical internet resources, and it was strengthening ccTLD's in East Africa. So we embarked, on it and decided to use the lens, using the lens of consumer protection, best practice models for redelegation and management, because we realized that two East African countries, Rwanda and Uganda, the ccTLDs were still held by individuals. One, the Ugandan one, was a Ugandan individual, while Rwanda was an individual based in Switzerland. And by then, most of the African countries have begun to realize that ccTLDs are important, important to the economy of the country. And so most governments and other stakeholders are quite keen to see their ccTLDs redelegated. And we use a lens of consumer protection, of course, redelegation, cybercrime, and also access to internet and broadband. The study itself is descriptive in nature.
Sorry, are we able to ask questions along the way, or do you want us to hold questions?
Let's hold the questions, because she's only given the context, then you'll have the findings, then we'll ask questions from there. Please proceed.
Thank you. It's descriptive in nature, was conducted in the 5 East African countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda. Why we did the study was, the belief that it will benefit policy-making processes, but also contribute to research, to increase and knowledge at the East African level. Now, what were the objectives? The first one was to identify the trends in management of ccTLDs generally in the East African region, and then to highlight consumer issues, highlight access of the issues relating to access to broadband and the internet, identify cybercrime and how it, in what way it affected our ccTLDs, exploring best practice, redelegation best practice, identifying a criteria for good governance, identifying ongoing policy and regulatory issues that are faced by ccTLDs, and also highlighting consumer issues that relate to ccTLDs. Now, the strategy used, as I mentioned, conducted in the 5 East African countries. It was a 3-stage process. We first started with a literature review, and then collected data, both primary and secondary, and then validated the findings during the national IGF in Kenya, East African IGF in Rwanda, and now we're beginning to disseminate some of the findings, and so that we can improve on the study. In terms of the target population and sampling, it was segmented within the stakeholder community and included the 5 ccTLD registries, the 5 regulatory authorities in the 5 countries, ISPs and consumers, and we used structured questionnaires for each stakeholder group to collect primary data. I think I will stop there at the objectives, and then I think hand over to Mureithi.
Thank you very much, Aris. I like that vision you had. I like the inspiration. I like what you are looking at. In other words, we shouldn't be where we are. We can be the space for us to move forward. Now, what is the finding of that? I'll ask Paul to tell us what is the finding and what are the recommendations.
These are the findings from the research, and they've been categorized into several classes. The first finding from the research was that contested redelegations lead to stake governance models. For example, where we have the government, the civil society, and the public, the private sector coming together to form the governance model for that ccTLD. Finding number 2 is that governments play a very key role in the ccTLD oversight, and it was found that that role should be limited to that of equal partners, the equal partners being the private sector and another partner. It was also found that regulatory authorities, for example in Kenya, the Communication Commissions of Kenya, they see themselves as the facilitators of the process regarding the redelegation of the ccTLDs. And finding number 4, it is that most master ccTLDs regimes, they receive the most support from the stakeholders, which are the government, the private sector, and the civil society groups. There was also finding number 4, it's the multi-staker model, ccTLD. They receive the most support from the stakeholders. Yes. And finding number 5, it was found that capacity building and education programs for all stakeholders, including the ccTLD operators, were identified as the essential to effective participation in the ccTLD and operation of the ccTLD. The finding number 6, it was also found that local identity of the ccTLD is important to consumers, and it was noted that more should be done to raise awareness of the ccTLD in the national markets to make use of the ccTLD in doing businesses. There was the finding number 7, it suggested that responses suggest that cyber security, which is a very critical issue and one of the growing importance, is not well understood by stakeholders, and it is a prime target for capacity building. And the last finding, it was found that regional and international internet governance forums, organizations, they have a key role to play in capacity building. And that includes both, in Kenya we have the Kenya IGF, and the regional, the East African, and also the international one, the IGF, UN IGF. I'll also present to you the recommendations which were put forward from this research. This is the way forward. And one of them was to strengthen the technical operations, including implementation of the DNSSEC, use of IPv6 in the networks for ccTLDs. Another recommendation is to strengthen the business operations and governance. And the strategies will be to establish a local control of the ccTLD, to have a clear governance model, which we've said the most recommended is the multi-staker model. And the other one, another recommendation was this strengthening process should go way beyond just providing efficient technical and business for the domain name, and it must get involved in education, awareness creation to the local community, and also begin to provide critical starting points for online, social, economic, cultural, and political activity. It was also recommended that ccTLDs are not just technical institutions. They should have an impact on internet development of a country. They should act as a broker between the national political, social, and economic institutions and international internet governance and the policy processes taking place. And there is the last one. It's that a recommendation at the 2010 East Africa IGF, which was to form like a working group to form .ESC, a regional top-level domain for East African community. in cooperation with all the 5 ccTLDs in East Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that elucidation of the findings, the key findings of the study, and also a way forward. What do we do with the findings? Paul has come out very clearly with what could be done, and I can see strengthen technical cooperation, strengthen business, strengthen this, and so somebody must be prepared to roll up the shirt sleeves and say, yes, based on these recommendations, we are going to do this, implement them with a view of getting what we are looking for, strengthening the ccTLD in our respective country. Now, this ball falls on those who are administering the ccTLDs in the region. And one of them is here with us, Abibu Rashid. I would like you to tell us, leading that and also being part of this process, what are the issues that come to mind? What are the challenges that you see? How will we be able to match all the resources? And we are talking about political resources, we are talking about financial resources, we are talking about even the goodwill of the society to be able to realize and to implement those recommendations. Luckily, we have a lot of expertise here, and so you can also throw some of the issues to the floor, and I'm very certain that we'll be able to get some responses. So let us hear from somebody who is directly impacted by these recommendations. Abibu,
yeah,
you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. I will try to be brief because I was part of the recipient to the research questionnaire. So what has been summarized is what basically the inputs we gave them. But to me, we are talking of strengthening, making something strong. And this basically starts from the foundation. If you don't have a strong foundation, then you can't strengthen something on a weak foundation. So the critical thing is the good foundation. And the foundation starts with the governance model of the registry. And fortunately, there are about 5 governance models of the registry. The registry can be part of the government, or the registry can be part of the academia, or the registry can be independent but externally controlled. The registry can be independent but self-regulated, or the registry can be outsourced. Both these governance models, they are not unique that they can be applied in every country. It depends on the circumstance. And they have advantages and disadvantages. So it's the matter of the specific country to weigh out which governance model suits the environments of the specific country. But mathematically, you can put it as the governance is a function of regulatory and legal framework. Now, from the experience in Tanzania is that the way it was done, it started way back in 2005 after the World Summit on Information Society in Tunis. The government, through the regulator, initiated the discussion on how best.tz can be managed. So out of this discussion, a national committee was formed to discuss and research on the best governance. And the outcome of it, we came up with the independent, self-regulated model. So KeNIC is a not-for-profit entity which is supposed to be self-regulating, meaning that it's overseen by the Policy Advisory Committee. And this committee involves all stakeholders. Okay? In terms of challenges, there are 2 types of challenges. One is on the technical side. The other is the operational side, which takes the issues of publicity, awareness to the community. Because most of the people do use the internet, but the ccTLD are part of the DNS, and most of the people are not aware of the DNS. So I was speaking to the Google guy here about the challenges I have at the moment. Technically, I'm okay. I do have a number of secondary services for the .tz registry, but the take-up is real small. Whenever I attend meetings, normal people do ask me, how do I get a free email.tz email account? It's a challenge to me because it's easy for employees in companies or entities to have email accounts in .tz. So my challenge here is the take-up, but people are not aware on the benefits of the TLD itself. We understand as register operators that ccTLD's are critical internet infrastructure, but the normal user is not an issue. So technically, the KeNIC was successful through the membership to associations like FTLD, because we are building capacity through FTLD, and this FTLD has relationships with the ICANN, ISOC, and IDRC, and we attend most of the technical trainings through FTLD. So in terms of technical capacity, when you are starting, it's really a challenge. But once you are through with it, you keep on improving. But the awareness to the local internet community is a big challenge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We hear from the person who is going to implement this, the challenge that he foresees, but I think it's also a call for all of us. How can we be able to support him and the other managers, other administrators of ccTLD's to overcome those challenges? As we go on, I would like to get a bird's eye view how we have come along in the evolution of the internet from the day there was no internet, and how we have created these structures. And as we create those structures, those that have been successful, what are the lessons that we have learned, and how can we use that for Africa? And for that, I want to ask none other than the grandfather of the internet, Vint Cerf, just to tell us, from bird's eye view, you have seen all this grow. You have seen the child grow from, is it minus or from zero to where we are now? Please.
So how much time do we have? I have 40 years of history to. Let me just begin first of all by saying that I'm a little bit surprised at the scope of expectation that you have illustrated for the ccTLD's. The description here is. It puts upon the ccTLD's almost all the burden of developing the use of internet in country. And I'm surprised at that, because the ccTLD's perform a very important infrastructure role, but other parts of the internet environment seem to me important to developing the use of internet. The internet service providers, for example, at least in other parts of the world, undertake to offer services in addition to basic connectivity. The ISPs often offer email services. They often offer other kinds of applications, hosting, for example. So it seems to me, first of all, that the ccTLD operators should not bear the entire burden of developing interest in and use of internet in country, but they should be joined by others who have the same interest, which is to grow the use of this system. So I would like to hear some explanation of why other ISPs haven't also been expected to participate in that. I'm going to pause now, and because you want to say something, and then we'll come back to dialogue again, if that's okay. Sir.
Well, I will talk from my experience. Yeah, we do have relationship with the ISPs for the case of Tanzania, because we have two members, the public sector and the private sector. And the private sector is represented by Internet Service Provider Association. The challenge we have in terms of the support from the ISPs is that, for instance, registry services for those ISPs who are accredited as registrars is not their core business. That is challenge, okay? So registry services is not their core business. So in terms of marketing, we have very little marketing from the ISP, though our members. Another challenge is that these operators sometimes, or most of the time, they do also facilitate the registration of these generic domain names. And so the pricing issue is a challenge. And sometimes what we do for the case of Tanzania, we advertise our price list, But this price list does not involve the issues of hosting. So when it comes to an end user, the registrant, when he goes to the ISP, basically the package he gets is something which is higher than the normal price we give. And this is inclusive of registration, renewal fee, and whatever. And they don't demarcate that this is registration fee, this is a renewal fee, and this is a hosting. So at the end of the day, you find our prices, they seem to be high, while they are not.
Okay, so could I, let's keep going, if Mr. Chairman. First thought that comes to mind is that people have to have a reason for registering a second level or a third level domain name. Is the Tanzanian structure like some of the others, like co.tz and edu or something? Okay, so in some jurisdictions, individual users have been encouraged to register domain names, which they then bind to email and other services. It seems to me that unless there are opportunities for users to associate themselves personally with a domain name, that you won't see very much action at the registry side. The ISPs have to have facilities, hosting facilities and other applications that are appealing to individual users, or again, there won't be much interest in using domain names for personal identification. So this feels to me like there is, in fact, a mutual interest between the ISPs and the ccTLDs. If the ISPs want more customers to come to them and use a broader range of services and also use the domain name system for their purposes, it feels to me as if there should be some mutual marketing going on between the ISPs and the ccTLD operator. I sense in your comments a great concern for income in order to support and sustain the operation of the ccTLD registry, and I completely agree and understand that if it's not sustainable, then it can't be reliable. So once again, we come back to this question of inventing reasons for registration in the domain name, and that's just inventing applications that take advantage of having a personal registration or a corporate registration. The next thing I would observe is that there is a strong correlation in the strength of internet operation in country and the amount of local content that's available. There's a paper that Yanis Karklins is offering in one of the sessions later today, I think maybe even in this room, which talks about the correlation between the strength of the internet business in country and the rate of growth of local content. This makes a great deal of sense to me because people come to the internet for useful information, and often information that is of local interest, that's either national or even more geographically confined, is the information they're looking for. So I'm concerned as I look at the list of issues that are in this summary document that the ccTLD operation has been burdened with expectations that it can't reasonably fulfill without the cooperation of other parts of the internet apparatus. So let me stop there, Mr. Chairman. I think we have other people who want to comment.
Thank you very much, Vint, for those comments. I'd like to open the floor to comments. Let's be guided by the thrust of the study with a view of improving it, with a view of adding comments. I know you have a lot of expertise. Let us see how we can use that, bring that expertise in the context of supporting ccTLDs in Africa. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I think that the findings of the study are very interesting indeed, and I think that there are a few things that are really notable that struck me as a businessman in a very positive way. You look at one of the big challenges around Africa generally has been the role of government. What is the appropriate role of government? How much of a leading role does government have? And one of the things, if you look around, in a past life I worked at the World Bank, and we did studies and looking at the role of government, and what we found is that in countries where government was a huge percentage of the national economy, that in fact those countries were generally poorer, right? So what you're recommending in terms of the role of the multi-stakeholder system, and especially the role of business, I think is right on, and I highly encourage you from what we've seen. One of the things that kind of Vint hints at is what is the business model and what is the brand that a regional CC is going to be pushing forward? And I think that is one of the things that is a very big challenge. There are questions in the public mind about the reliability and the stability of the local enterprise in some instances, for good reasons, in some instances for not such good reasons, that their perceptions may be outdated, right? But I think part of this is about establishing a brand for the local ccTLDs, and I would argue a brand as much as possible connected to business and growing business. Because when we're talking about the best development programs around, they are in fact around getting people jobs. I know that there's tremendous expectation around ICT for job creation. And so I think that there is a role that the CCs can play, and I hope that we'll have a chance to talk and dive into that, because I think that's a way that the private sector can be really helpful to your task. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That is hardcore business, and you have seen very good recommendations around it. We must brand it. Any other comment from, oh yes.
Thank you, Keith Davidson. I think, firstly, Vint did pose the issue that was arising in my mind quite strongly, and that was the idea that there seemed to be, through this idea of the ccTLDs having a massive task to outreach the internet and get more people online and involved and so on. And whether that's an appropriate role for ccTLDs, I feel quite strongly about that, because they do have quite a strict requirement on them to obey their rules under RFC 1591 and what the limitations and extent of the obligations of the ccTLD are. And so I think freeing them up to do their job is great, but burdening them with too much may cost you the opportunity for the growth that they might otherwise have been able to explore. I was really interested in the discussion about the original redelegations and the discussion that the original ccTLD holders were individuals, and somehow the hint was that that was somehow inappropriate. And I wonder if we could explore in a bit more detail exactly why there was felt to be a need to do the redelegation, and was work done with the individuals to try and create the sort of ccTLD that you wanted, and were they unwilling to go with a broader plan and so on? And I also just ask, while the study is obviously in its quite early days, if there's any statistical evidence that this has been a success in terms of growth of ccTLD registrations or those sorts of things. Is there some empirical evidence that the model that's been generally utilised is working well and robustly? Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. We introduced ourselves just before you came in, so we'll penalize you by first of all asking you to introduce yourself, and then you can proceed.
Hello, and apologies for being late to the session. I was caught up in the queues. My name is Emily Taylor, and I'm a member of the MAG. I've also worked in the ccTLD environment for the last 12 years, and apologies again for missing the early part of the presentation, because this is a subject of great interest to me. So some of the comments that I make may contradict or conflict with what's presented. I hope you'll bear with me on that. I think that, as Vint said, there is a very complex ecosystem in establishing the internet in a country. It's about the infrastructure, it's about local language content. I'm also interested in the UNESCO study and their findings that just something as simple as location of servers locally has an enormous economic impact in the country. And my experience of ccTLD's is that they tend to have an ethic of service and almost to rely on the community to pull the domain names out of them, if you like, rather than to be pushing a brand. And that's probably why it might be a struggle in some countries that where you as I think basic barriers to access start to be overcome, a tremendously exciting progression in this in the last 5 years. The mobile internet in Africa, as more and more mobile users become internet enabled, and the growth, I think, of local language content, then it becomes worth people getting their own domain name, and it becomes worth registering. And so I think that that is an important thing. Don't be too hard on, don't have too high expectations of creating a vibrant ccTLD in, with the absence of all of those other elements that will build up a healthy internet in country, would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Emily. Now, because of some very good comments, I'll not penalize you. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. Yeah, we also have managers of ccTLDs in other countries. We can get some, could you get some experiences relating to the issues here? Use value, content, experience, issues on redirection, statistics that could be used to some statistics that could be used to justify whatever model. The floor is yours. Okay. Alice?
Thank you. The issue regarding correlation between, the strength of internet business and local content, in fact, was one of the first issue we found out, the study finds out. I think what you have there is just a snapshot. The full report actually recognizes the ATU and other research findings that have been conducted regarding, especially the Kenyan ccTLD, that given poor internet penetration and lack of e-commerce, the continent ccTLDs are likely to have very low usage. And I think we're not placing that expectation. I think perhaps the presentation of the findings were not properly well done. But now, wearing my hat as the chair of the Kenyan ccTLD KeNIC, one of the things we've found out very specifically is we cannot burden KeNIC, for example, to go out and directly do the marketing and public relations to encourage more domain names. And in fact, what we've done, one of the strategies within our own strategic plan for the next 2 years is to partner with the government and the private sector and civil society in their efforts towards increasing access to the internet. That's the only way then we are able to bring in the issue of increased domain names. And one of the strategies actually been partnering with Google at the Kenyan level. Quite a number of activities which I think the ccTLD manager, David, there can explain. And as well as with schools, with the Kenya Education Network, ensuring that we with the government as well, with the new, open data, services and development of local content, encouraging the .ke domain, registration of .ke domain. So I think we have been very careful, and Tanzania will give its own experience, but we have been very careful at the Kenyan level not to burden. And in fact, we don't even expect KeNIC to do any direct marketing or public relation. The strategic idea is to partner with all the other institutions. Now, regarding redelegation, I think it's within the context of the fact that most countries, especially, there's a growth of internet stakeholders, individual users, the government beginning to use internet for e-government services, mobile internet. And I think it's that realization, call it both political, social, and economic, that people feel a need to redelegate. And I can see hands raising and my colleague from Tanzania smiling. And for Kenya, for example, it was more, the realization, again, because, most of us seated on this table were part of the redelegation process. What prompted us to do it was the fact that it was owned, we felt it's owned by an individual. It's, we felt it needed to be owned, but, within the multi-stakeholder model. In the internet, stakeholders needed to be part of that ownership. And when you look at the structure, the governance structure of KeNIC, we've got industry representative, government representative, civil society, individual users that actually impact and influence the direction that that KeNIC by having representation at the board level. Policy decisions are made using the same bottom-up multi-stakeholder process. For example, we are currently actually developing our own dispute resolution at the national level, dispute resolution process because we are beginning to get a few more disputes over domain name registration. And so that's how we felt it needed to be governed. We actually felt as a country, the internet stakeholders all felt that KeNIC needed to be governed using a multi-stakeholder model. And in fact, Mureithi was one of the initial stakeholders and can explain that better. So it's coming from that background. And I'm giving Kenya as the example that I'm very familiar with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Kenya, the manager, to tell us something.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to add on to what my board chair said, one of the issues, we have actually identified some critical success factors on how to really move from the pull, rather what you're trying to, very hard to pull, and go into more of a push mode. And some of the issues that we've identified is first to enhance the capacity of our customers as well as registrars. Since we are not able to work directly with the end user, we've decided to build the capacity of our registrars, and one of the things that we do is to train them. And some of the areas that you're trying to train them on is automation of their systems, especially on building their capacity on sales. We're also training them on DNSSEC, and also we create awareness. The awareness that we are creating is in terms of conducting workshops, talking more about the .ke registry, the .ke domain name, and what value that we are adding in terms of, as opposed to the other GTLDs, we are trying to create that awareness in terms of what value the .ke domain name can offer. We're also conducting forums. Whenever there are new policies, we come together and we discuss them through the multi-stakeholder approach that has just been discussed. And just to mention, to just give the feedback on whether this model is working, the numbers that you have on that presentation is 12,438 domain name registrations. But now we are actually on 18,000, going to 19,000. So it means it is working, though there's still a lot more that needs to be done. And on the other critical success factor that we identified was to improve customer service to registrars and the end users. So we give them customer support tools. We enhance our relationships with the registrars. Of course, that interaction with the registrar, not just during the AGM, but also regularly during our operational period. We're also getting feedback from them to ensure that we enhance the value of what we are offering. So we are conducting satisfaction surveys to get that feedback, to know exactly what it is that we need to improve on. But the most critical thing that we are doing is the strategic partnerships that my board chair mentioned. And this has worked very well. Our approach is to use both the public and the private sector strategic partnerships, and one of the big partnerships we're having is with Google. These partnerships, of course, we want to leverage on the strengths of our partners and use our own strengths to ensure that the end user benefits in terms of, one, end user education, understanding exactly what it is, and also building what I mentioned, the capacity of our registrars. The other thing, like my colleague here mentioned, was the partnerships that we have with ICANN, with FTLD, ITU, AFRINIC, and the rest, so that what my colleague mentioned, training, that capacity building for the registry, I think that those are areas that we are ensuring that we are able to reach out to more registrations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, I do recognize that Keith at one point mentioned about an issue you had raised, so perhaps could be an opportunity for you to respond to what Keith had raised earlier. And then after that,
So I think I'd like to draw attention to two things. First of all, we all, I think, appreciate that mobiles have become an important access method to get to internet-based information. What we've learned at Google is that the kind of information that people look for through their mobiles is not the same as the kind of information they look for from laptops and notebooks and things like that. The information they look for with mobiles tends to be geographically localized. Often they're looking at maps saying, where am I, or how do I get to a particular place? They may be looking for products or services that are literally geographically locally available. The term local content sometimes is interpreted to mean content in a local language. But in the world we live in of advertising at Google, local content often means something that's geographically local. I don't think that the ccTLD's, which are really key parts of infrastructure, can necessarily drive demand for domain names. They have to be prepared to respond to demand. But the real demand comes from the value that's added by having a domain name that does something for you. And the rest of the internet ecosystem has to drive that. So when you have more companies that want to be visible and want to be associated with the ccTLD because they want to serve a local population, then they are driven to register and have presence in the ccTLD. So again, I have to say that the term ecosystem is very well taken, because this is a business activity that involves a lot of different drivers. No one party can be responsible for creating the demand. It really is the aggregate of the different stakeholders that create demand for internet-based services. The last thing I want to emphasize is that all the statistics I've seen show that when there is local information, that is to say information about products and services that are available in country and geographically locally, that you see an uptick in demand for registration and presence in the domain name system. So we have to exercise that mechanism in order to improve the condition of the ccTLD operation.
Thank you, Vint, for those comments. Now I'd like to ask Abibu to give us the Tanzania experience.
Well, I wanted to add from where Wambua ended in terms of building capacity, and also the issue of the challenges, technical and publicity or marketing. As most of you would agree, the registry can't do all the business in terms of marketing, and it's a tedious job. But for the case of Tanzania, I presented the issue that the ISPs, or the accredited registrars, registry services is not their core business, so they do little marketing or publicity of .tz domain names. But this can be facilitated from the issue of providing them incentives so that they can compete. In that way, automatically, they will start slowly marketing even the registry services. Okay, and when I talked about the domain take-up, I was not saying that it's very little, but it's not as per the population we have. For instance, initially we had about 6,000 domain names. By then, it was through the registrars who were doing it voluntarily, and the domains were registered for good. They had no expiration period. After establishing the expiration of 1 year, the domain went down to 4,000. And initially, there were about 40 domains in a month registered before we took over. But through our publicity, though it's not very effective, we have gone up to 150 domains a month. Okay, and another approach I would think is maybe to advocate the DNS business at schools and universities, not in terms of marketing, but in terms of building capacity and awareness for future managers of the registry. By doing so, you will be indirectly doing the marketing, because once they graduate and join a certain industries which are using maybe .com, they will be able to convince and tell the reason why they should register .tz domain.
Thank you very much. And I would like us to go to, we have looked at the business side of it. Can you also look at also the underlying infrastructure, technologies that we need to take into account, but most importantly about security of this, security. And I would like to call upon Paul just to give some thoughts about the experience in our country and what we are doing, and also some input from you.
Thank you, Morioki. I'll talk about DNSSEC deployment in East Africa. And currently, of the 5 ccTLDs in East Africa, none has been signed, DNSSEC signed. Although other measures like transitional key signatures, they're in place. But what is happening currently, I'm aware that we as KeNIC, Kenya.ke, we have a testbed on DNSSEC. Tanzania.tz, they also have a testbed on DNSSEC. And there are several tools available in the market, both open source and commercial, for the implementation of DNSSEC. I'm aware that TZNEC and KeNIC, we are using both Open DNSSEC, which is also the one in use by Nominate, and they are also the developers, part of the developers. So we have the test beds, and we are trying to see if we can roll out on full deployment by the end of the year to ensure that the zones, the .ke is signed, and maybe we can get comments from the floor for those who have signed their zones to tell us what it is, yes, their experience.
Thank you, Paul. The floor is yours. What experiences can you give us to strengthen what you are doing in East Africa and by extension Africa? Okay. Emery?
Sorry to ask for the floor again. I'm extremely impressed to hear of your DNSSEC testbed implementation, because many ccTLDs have struggled with DNSSEC, and I just wanted to share some information. I was involved in a study on behalf of Ofcom, the UK combined regulator, on uptake of DNSSEC amongst European registries. And, you know, without going into huge detail, what we found was that despite extensive work on behalf of many registries, Nominet being one of them, to both figure out how to implement the standard and to do it, there is absolutely no user demand. And that's very disappointing, because when you think of the number of larger businesses who could really do with securing their, their business in every possible way, just think of the online banks, the online retailers, to name but a few. Nothing. And so, congratulations for implementing that. Puts you very much at the forefront technically of the ccTLD community. But it was a surprise to me to learn of the low level of take-up, even in countries such as Sweden, which have had deployment of DNSSEC for many years, that their major banks are not registering or are not securing their own domain in DNSSEC. So this brings us back to our ecosystem point, that it sounds like the registries are doing their bit, and that the knowledge of what the standard can do for the users and the demand from the users in developed countries for DNSSEC is just not there at the moment, and it should be.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you very much for those comments. Very inspiring, and I think they'll make Paul to continue working hard on what he's doing. Keith?
Just a very quick observation about DNSSEC, and congratulations on making good progress in that regard. But I think one of the bigger issues that seems to be emerging in the Asia Pacific region, at least, which is the only region I can speak authoritatively about, but it's the policy environment and the policies that you have for DNSSEC that are really, really critical. For example, with a signed domain name, transferring between registrars becomes a very complicated business. So having clarity around the policies that you're going to have in place is quite critical. So just as a hint, as well as the technical deployment, look at your policy requirements and how to undo things on the occasions like transferring registrars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very useful input. The floor is open for comments, for Vint.
I can never pass up an available microphone. As speaking for Google, one of the things that we are very interested in and concerned about is the reliable operation of the domain name servers. When we register in any ccTLD, it's important to us that the domain name will resolve promptly and reliably every time. And so not only are we interested in things like DNSSEC, but we're also very interested in knowing that you have servers in country, you have backup servers, you may have backup servers, secondary domains that are operating outside of the country, so that resolution will continue to work even if there's a local problem. We also care a great deal about the security of the server system itself. Without picking on anyone, and as far as I know, none of the problems that I'm about to relate occurred in East Africa. But some of these smaller ccTLD operations are not as secure as they should be, and the machines have become penetrated, the domain names have been hijacked, our domain name is aimed at false service hosts. And we care a great deal, first of all, about preventing that from happening, and second, about recovery when it does happen. And in some cases, it's been very hard to find the operator of the ccTLD in order to do something about it. So these are places where non-local registrants, as we typically are, will be made more comfortable and happier if we have some assurance that there is a secure operation at that locale.
Thank you, Vint. Paul?
I'll comment on the DNS redundancy. It's a requirement that when you're setting up a registry, ccTLD registry, that you have servers in at least 2 different geographical locations. For KeNIC, we have 3 DNS servers, 2 in Kenya, but not in the same location, and 1 in the US, which is hosted by COSA, the operator for the Uniforum. And then we are also in the process of doing another one with the TZ, so that we also expand our redundancy. And the second one, the one we have, it's an NCAS service, which has 13 instances all over the world. So in terms of redundancy, we are doing good.
Great.
Thank you very much. This is a very exciting session. I'm learning a lot. We are also learning a lot. And I can assure you, the next time you come I would like to have another IGF in Kenya. The next time you come to Kenya, you will see a lot of these in East Africa and the region. There's one item that we have looked at the marketing side of it. We have also looked about security, but there's that bullet one there, which is saying that ccTLDs are not just a technical institution, but they are going to midwife the development of our countries, national, political, socio, economic, and also the link between our countries to the global village. I would like some comments allowed that and how you see it from your own country, how you have moved the ccTLD from being a technical institution to really mainstream it in the development of the country. Comments? I think the first one, good. I wanted to announce a gift, but I'll do it later.
Basically, ccTLD's is a national resource for communication. So the reaction behind a territory or country is to manage its resource. And that's where we come to redelegation issues. You manage it within the country, you build your capacity, technical capacity and even usage. But if you come to consider the contribution a ccTLD has to national development, they are quite a lot. First of all, it contributes to localization of content. Doesn't matter whether it's in a local language or whatever. But using the ccTLD and using the ISPs, you can localize the local content, which is made for local communication. That is a great contribution because it minimizes the traffic which goes outside of the country unnecessarily. So that is an economic contribution. And in terms of capacity, I touched the issue of education, educating the young guys at the university. You find in the past, for the case of Tanzania, and that's why we are thinking the marketing through the approach of providing lectures at the universities and colleges. The DNS content in the curriculum is very little. If you call a graduate from a university today and ask him if you type something on the, if you type the URL on the browser, what happens before you get you get the content? They are not aware. So having a ccTLD locally managed, you have an opportunity to explain in real life to a student or to these future managers of the registry.
Thank you, Abibu, for those comments. The floor is still open. Yes, and please come over so that you can use the microphone. First thing we'll ask you is to introduce yourself and your association or affiliation, and then I give you the permission to proceed. So introduce yourself.
Is that working? Yeah. I'm Mohammed Ibrahim from Somalia. I manage the .so ccTLD. You might be surprised to hear Somalia and ccTLD, the two words together, but nevertheless, yes, we have ccTLD up and running for the last 2 years. And yes, I concur with the comments made earlier from Tanzania, and I just want to add a couple of other ideas. I think there's no argument that ccTLDs are contributing to the education sector and the economy and so on, but we can do better, and that's where I want to focus on. And I just want to throw a couple of ideas. One of them is I'm always surprised as I travel within the continent. Normally I actually live in Australia, but I'm seconded to the Somali government for 2 years. And these 2 years I'm spending a lot of time traveling within the continent. I was in Cotonou last week and so on and so forth. But as I meet people, especially government officials, ministers and so on, and I get their business cards, I feel embarrassed to see government officials giving me Hotmail or Gmail accounts. And I always wonder, but your country, you have your own ccTLD. How come you're not promoting this? So it's only a little thing, but nevertheless, it's a big thing. And why is it a big thing? Because it's part of the branding. It's part of making sure we're known, we are using these services. And the other part is the universities, where again, as I travel I'm at Melbourne University myself normally, but now I'm spending time in the continent. So I always visit the universities. And the same issue, I ask, I say, look, I want to write to the students who are doing ICT. And when I get their emails, they're all over the place, Gmail, Hotmail, what have you. And I say, well, why is it? You know, you should really have xyz.edu. Whatever the country is. So they're little things, but to me, they are major issues, and they are quick wins. They are things we can do without anyone's help from outside or anywhere else. I might say more later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much to know that Somalia is here. So .so is alive. And if you have any question, talk to him. If you want a domain name at .so, he's here. Can we get one? So if you want .so, we can, thank you very much. Andrew?
Thank you very much for the comment from .so, because it tracks my personal experience very much, working with senior government officials, and I don't think I'm speaking ill, in places like Nigeria, where we have real issues around whether the names will resolve, whether they'll actually get the emails in some instances, and also there are people who have real concerns because of the past. So part of the branding that I was talking about is this sense of branding. Is there a perception that the internet is open for business in your country? What does that mean? I don't mean to be so narrow and to sound like it's so much of a business thing. That said, I think approaching it to some extent like a business really helps, and making it obviously in partnership with the business community is your quickest and easiest way. There may even be possibilities for you to partner with some of the Gs, because a lot of the people who are interested in working in Kenya also want to work in a lot of other places. And I think that there is a natural affinity, there's a natural harmony. If you try to go up against a large GTLD and replace them, I don't think that makes sense. I think that there's, especially given your desire to have resources around capacity building and such, a partnership with them may make more sense. That was one thought. I do have a question, though, about some of the initiatives that are coming out around and how you think that they will affect. For example, I would like to get an East Africa domain because we would like to do much more East Africa work. Do I get 5 East Africa CCs? Do I get an EAC when that comes along? Do I get a .Africa? These are, I think, legitimate questions for business people and NGOs that are really legitimately interested in Africa, but frankly don't want to spend their free time on administration. So I'd be interested in what you think about that and what recommendations you might have for your friends in the outside world.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I know there's a lot of thoughts allowed .ESC, and I'm going to ask one of us here to talk about where we are and what we are thinking about. But before then, there's a lady who wanted to ask. Now, because you're not here when you are introducing ourselves, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then I give you the permission to pose the comment.
Hello, I'm Sala, and I'm from Fiji. And just in case you don't know where that is, it's in the Pacific. Yes, it's good to be here, and I bring greetings from the Pacific. They're streaming in right now, and they're tweeting as well. The comment that I'd like to make, by the way, I'm not from a ccTLD. I think that this session's been extremely valuable from our perspective in terms of best practices to take back from the East African experience in terms of strengthening the ccTLDs. Why do I say this? I make reference to one of the policy areas that was discussed in the WIGIG 2005 recommendations, and one of it's capacity building. And the point that I'd like to make is in terms of the experiences that have been shared around this table, particularly the transcripts. You have countries like Tuvalu. We had pre-hub IGF preparations, preparing them for this session. And some of them have no idea about the different governance models. So it was really good to have a New Zealand domain name commissioner who gave a briefing on the various models. So it was really interesting hearing from Tanzania and Kenya and KeNIC. And I really particularly enjoyed Tanzania's comment when he said that we have to, there has to be a level of impact into the curriculum. And I also make reference to Vincent's comments that the ccTLD cannot be left on its own to bear the burden or to shoulder the burden of developing internet infrastructure and capacity building. As we all know, it's a vast universe in itself, and there are various components. But I think going forward, one of the things that I can take back definitely to the Pacific, and interestingly, we're having a meeting after, is that some level of collaborative partnerships you know, the ccTLDs, the registries, registrars, universities, regional organizations that have the mandate to execute digital strategies, operators, telcos, ISPs, including companies and multinationals like Google, for instance. So this is really awesome, and thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for those comments. Very, very useful. We have Tanzania, we have Kenya, and I know all of them are interested in the .EAC. I don't know who will take the floor to give us some quick updates. I'm looking both sides. Aris?
Thank you. One of the unexpected outcomes of this study when we were conducting it was actually that question on whether or not we would like to have a regional TLD, and it's not just the .EAC but also .Africa. And there are mixed feelings about it. There's you know, a feeling that some of the ccTLDs are quite vulnerable, and so what impact would having a sub-regional or regional ccTLD have on those that are already quite vulnerable? And not just, and also that applies to the new GTLDs that are going to be introduced by ICANN. So there's been quite a lot of concern regarding what that would mean. But there's also the other argument that it may be better to have, one regional TLD that we could work with. But just like the same way we are reconsidering whether or not regional IGFs and how regional IGFs versus global IGFs and national IGFs, I think it's the same argument. Do we first strengthen our national ccTLDs first before we can begin to deal with the regional? And if we haven't, if the numbers, like I think we haven't even gotten to, I think, 20,000 in Kenya, for example, and that's because of course, the various challenges from infrastructure to, lack of e-commerce and all that. What really, is there really going to be an impact? Do we even need it, is the question. And, are we going to be doing it just because international businesses want to work with the East African region or Africa? We've got our own, challenges at the national level to deal with before we begin to think, at that sub-regional, regional and global level. And again, it links back to that digital divide we keep speaking about. We have a lot of work to do before we begin to think at that level. But again, there's the other argument, and I think I'll leave Tanzania, because the 5 ccTLDs themselves have very different. I think Rwanda, that's still redelegating, tends to think we may actually benefit from a .EAC or EAF. I think .EA is not available currently. So, I think we don't really have answers for it. But one thing I know, at least from a KeNIC perspective, that we would rather first strengthen our own ccTLD, and strengthening it does not necessarily mean the technical aspect. It actually even means forming partnerships with all the initiatives that are working so hard, so hard toward increasing access to the internet for our people. So that's why we want to go first. We want to partner with our government to make sure that, we are making available e-government services at the different levels, that we are creating a conducive environment to develop local relevant content, that we are ensuring that we can get that content centralized, at the national level by strengthening our ISPs and our ccTLDs. So we haven't started considering that, and even we're considering that it's at a very political level. It's the politics of it rather than the practical, social, and economic, economics of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Aris, for that. I think it's very, very clear. Now we have got, we have a minute left to end the session. I'll ask Vint to give one word as a grandfather to tell us. Something that will take us until the next IGF. And then from there, I'll ask David to give us a closing remark, and then we close the session. Okay, well, then let's start with Habib.
Yeah, I was totally agreeing with what Alice is saying about the EAC. It's not an issue that we should rush, because we still do have a challenge even on .Africa issue. And operational issues of a registry are really challenging, so we need to learn first on the .Africa management. Once we get a lesson from .Africa, then we can decide on how best we can move on. Because there are some perceptions, maybe we can have East .Africa.
That's how they cut you off here.
Some people are saying that we need to have like East .Africa, North .Africa, South .Africa, instead of, so EAC can be taken as a second level by using East .Africa. So those are different perceptions. So once we get the experience on the management of .Africa, then I think we'll be in a better position to decide how we go on with the .EAC. But the critical thing is just to assist our neighbors in the region so that they can establish their registries and have them operational the way we are moving on.
Well, let me just try to, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this session. It's really helpful for someone from the outside to get a sense for what life is really like trying to make these systems work locally. If I were to make one recommendation to you, it would be to convene a meeting of interested parties, not just those that you already have registered in the ccTLD, but rather the representatives of the internet ecosystem, either in country or in region. And the reason that you need to have all of them in place is that it really is an ecosystem, and it really requires mutual effort to and synergy in order to grow demand for internet services in country. And it's only with that growth that we would see a significant growth in demand for registrations, in particular ccTLDs. So this really is an effort to grow the utility of internet in country and in region. And that is the only real driver for causing registrations to happen. So you probably already have done this many times, but I think once again it should be a concerted campaign by all the interested parts of the ecosystem to drive interest in and use of internet for business, personal use, government use, and the like. Governments can lead by showing the use of internet to share government information. Transparency and utility can derive from that. But that's leadership. What's important is growth, and that's going to come from the private sector.
Thank you very much, Vint. Now I'll give David half a minute as the host of this event.
Thank you, Chair. So as a host of this session, would like to thank all of you for finding time to participate, especially the Chair, the panelists, all the participants, and we look forward to not just discussing, but also moving forward to implementing some of the best practices that we've been able to identify, and look forward to meeting you in other sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. It was very, very exciting. Thank you also the remote participants. We have got some comments, but luckily most of the issues listed by the remote participants have been addressed. Thank you very much. We are going to incorporate all the thoughts that you have given us, and I'm assuring you the next time you come to this region, you'll see the difference. Can we give a clap to you? Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the IGF.